Hi, everyone. I'm Chris. I'm a bookseller at Boswell, and today is day 4,142 that Boswell's been in business, and I'm excited to welcome you to this event. We're really excited to have SA Cosby here with us. Sean, welcome, talking to Carole. Here for a chat with Carole Barrowman, who is, of course, an author, a crime critic, director of creative studies and writing at Alverno College, where, Carole, you teach a really cool course on
The Art of the Mystery.
Art of the Mystery. Yeah, thank you. I knew I was going to get it wrong. So, but yeah, and we're excited to have her chatting here with SA Cosby, author of Blacktop Wasteland. I absolutely love this book. I'm going to kick it to Carole here in a sec for her to tell you some more, but he's, of course, a rising star in crime fiction, won an Anthony Award for Best Short Story. I believe that was in Tough magazines. He's here with a book, and I'm going to quote myself for my review here. Blacktop Wasteland is an ode to country folks living around the edges of legal who desperately want to be anything other than poor nobodies. And here's your car metaphor for the book. If this year's class of thrillers mostly look like a bunch of sad little Pintos puttering along, they're all rolling in the dust of Cosby's 69 Camaro. So I'm going to turn it over to Carole. Welcome, both of you.
Thank you, Chris. And Sean, thank you so much for joining us this evening. Before we start and go into the regular program, I just found out, friends, today is Sean's birthday. So I'm going to toast him. And I know he's got some booze sitting right there. So let's have a shot. If you all around here we go. Cheers and happy birthday, my friend.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Cheers. L'chaim.
Cheers. Okay. Now the important things are done. So that's right. So I have to tell you that I think this book's a stunner, and it blew me away. And I loved it for really 4 big reasons. And I want to just quickly say the 4 reasons. Some of them are super personal, and then the other is going to lead me to have you talk about it. The first one is I have been a fan of heist novels for my entire life. And this has to be, if not the best, one of the best heist novels. So I want to circle back and ask you why you decided on that, okay? Like, for example, Richard Stark's heist novels. I don't know if you know Richard Stark, Donald Westlake.
Yes.
Oh my God. When I read this, it was like, that's who I was thinking of. The second thing is I love Walter Mosley's Fearless Jones character. And I think Bug Beauregard he's like a 21st century Fearless Jones, all right, with a family. So I love that. The third thing is I am a huge Fast and Furious fan. So anything with cars, any book with cars in it, I'll read. Any book with houses in it, but any book with cars, I'll read. And then the last thing is, before you go tonight, I want you to tell me what I need to do with my car so I can drift. I want to know how to.
Let me address those in the order that you gave them to me. One, I love Richard Stark's Parker novels. I love heist novels because I think the heist novel at its core is a novel of dreams. It's a novel for all the vitriol and the violence and the blood and guts. The heist novel is about people dreaming, whether it's dreaming of retiring to the Bahamas or whether it's dreaming about being able to pay your electric bill. It is the stuff of dreams. It's like in the Maltese Falcon, that famous line from Sam Spade. It's the stuff dreams are made of. And so I wanted to write about a heist novel because it is the archetype of the fast money storyline. And so, Beauregard is in a situation where he needs fast money, and nothing gives you money quite as fast as a heist. And so that's why I was drawn to it. 2, I am one of the biggest Walter Mosley fans in the world. So that is incredibly high praise. I feel undeserving, but I thank you for that. I love the Fearless Jones novels. I love the Easy Rawlins novels, the Lenoy McGill novels. Walter is a genius. He's a master of words. And so to be even haphazardly compared to him is an honor for me. And then finally, drifting is easy. You don't need to do a lot to your car. You just got to master the brake and the gas at the same time. So I had to show you. I don't think I can tell you.
Well, if you ever come to town, I want a driving lesson, because my husband is terrified. Right. He's terrified that I'm going to try to do this someday by pulling up the parking brake.
You can do it with the park, and you can do it.
I think you could.
If you've got a standard shift, you can do it with the parking brake. But if you have an automatic, it's best to use the gas and the brake. So, but that's enough of my outlaw style. So
that's all right. I used to drive an original old Mustang, so I can appreciate Bug's Duster. So give us. There's likely to be some people out there listening and watching us who really don't know very much about the book. So how about your elevator pitch? And since a car is at the heart of this book, let's make it your garage pitch.
In my garage pitch. So basically, Blacktop Wasteland is the story of Beauregard Bug Montage, an African-American auto mechanic who lives in southeastern Virginia, who at once upon a time was known as the wheelman east of the Mississippi. As the book opens, he's left that life behind and tried to settle down and grab onto his version of the American dream. Unfortunately, he's under a mountain of financial debt. His business is going under because of a new rival competitor that's opened up in town. He has a terminally ill mother who may be getting kicked out of her nursing home because of a clerical error with her Medicaid assistance. He has a daughter from a previous relationship who has just graduated from high school and wants to go to college in the fall. And he's married and has 2 sons in his current relationship. And of course, those sons are young and they need everything that kids need. And his wife, he wants to, one day, they live in a mobile home, and one day he wants to buy her house, as he says in the book, on a foundation, not a house on wheels. And so he's got his back up against the wall, and as the book opens, he gets in contact, or a former associate gets in contact with him with a quote-unquote can't-miss deal about robbing a jewelry store in a small town. And of course, as things are wont to do in this type of book, the jewelry store robbery does not go as planned, and so Bug finds himself pressed against the wall, divided between the man he wants to be and the man he thinks he is.
Well, that's a perfect description of it. Let's talk a little bit about Bo, or Bug, as people in the novel talk to him about, and then maybe you can read us a little bit too.
Okay.
But one of the things that I loved about Bug is that he doesn't like himself so much, and and his inner life is so richly detailed. In fact, it's almost a cliche to say a book is lyrical, but for this book to be so raw and so rough, and to have violence at its heart and fast cars at its heart, it's like a poem to a working man, and to what it means to have dignity and live for dignity. And so what really would drive me nuts, when I got a little bit into it, I was so mad at him for being mad at himself and coming down on himself all the time. Even though I understand obviously what is happening to him, but how was there like a situation you imagined him in when you started writing, or did you give him a biography? Writers do all sorts of different things when they create their main characters. Where did he come from?
He originally appeared in a short story that I wrote for a magazine called Thug Lit, published by the great Todd Robinson out of New York. And I wrote a short story about the Duster, and Bug narrating how he came in possession of the Duster, which actually is represented in the book later on. And what happened was, when I first started writing the book, I was fascinated by his character. I'm fascinated by identity. We have a public face, a private face, and a real face. And so I'm fascinated by that idea. And I wanted to take a character like Bug and really delve into how he sees himself as opposed to how he wants to be, and whether or not that's possible. The idea of that dichotomy, the idea of like the Greek or the Roman god Janus, with the faces going forward and backwards. And I wanted to talk about how we decide who we are, and how much of that decision is in our hands, and how much of it is, nature versus nurture. And so Bug being hard on himself is just it grows out of this desire he has to be better, because he knows he could be better. But circumstances, whether it's race or poverty or class or just his own hubris, keep him from attaining this level of humanity that he knows he's capable of, but unfortunately doesn't seem to be able to attain.
Yeah, in fact, one of the notes I made on the book it's from later in the book, and I promise no spoilers here for those of you who haven't read it yet, but gets right to what you're saying, Sean. What should be and what was rarely aligned. And
yeah,
I loved it because then this is what I mean by sort of lyrical and poetic. It captures what you've just said, but he's a car mechanic, and there's lots of the language of cars is everywhere in this book, like a line. I mean, you deliberately, and I love to think that just came out, right? But and it may have, but the language of cars and the fact that people call him Bug, and sometimes he feels like he's a bug on the world's windshield, you know, that kind of stuff. He's an amazing character. Tell us about his relationship with his father, because that's critical to what happens in this book.
It's complex because all his life he's put his father on his pedestal because he cannot deal with the reality. And I think that's, the Duster in the book, he has a car, 71 Plymouth Duster, cherry red with a black racing stripe, and that car belonged to his father. And early on in the book, when he's talking about his financial problem, his wife, Kia, tells him repeatedly, sell the Duster, and we'll give us some breathing room. But he can't bring himself to do it because the Duster is sort of a metaphor for his inability to move on, to mature. We always look at the past with rose-colored glasses. We always look through the veil of nostalgia. And for Bug, that veil of nostalgia is dangerous because he, again, like I said, he puts his father on his pedestal. It's his way of dealing with this open wound in his heart that's left behind because his father has disappeared. His father left him at a time that was crucial to his growing, his adulthood. And I leave it kind of vague as to whether he left on his own or whether he had to leave, but he's gone. And so for Bug, he fills this hole with this idealized version of his father, this fantasy version of his father. And that is what drives a lot of his decisions because he loves his father, but at the same time, he has disdain for him. He loves him for what he meant to him, but he has disdain for him because he wants to be a better father for his own children. And everything that he does in the book, from the violence to the robberies to the tender moments with his wife and his kids, is done out of love. And so I was fascinated with the idea for someone who is so broken inside that they're not able to disseminate between things they do that are positive and things they do are negative. He keeps telling himself these things that he's doing it for a good reason, but he's doing horrible things from the bottom of his heart.
Well, and I love the fact that you use the word tender, because there are so many moments. In fact, you have this wonderful description of one of those tender moments when Bug feels like a hitch in his heart. And we've all experienced that, right? That, oh my. And one of the most moving scenes, and I'm not going to set the context for this, but he's talking with his oldest son, and his oldest son has acted out of love on something. And Bug is just shocked by what he's discovering. And he looks at the son, and there's so much love and emotion. And I think it's happening in a car too. A lot of really critical scenes happen in cars. And this happens in this scene. And he looks at his son, and given everything else that's going on in the world right now with Black Lives Matter, I mean, I took all of that into reading this book, and he looks at this young boy and he says something. He says, "You just need to be a 12-year-old boy." And I felt that hitch, because it's like, oh my God, how he's looking at this young black man, young man, and saying, you just need to be a 12-year-old. I don't know if you have kids or you don't have kids or whatever, but that balance you have in this book between the tender and the violent, can you speak to that just a little more?
I think the idea, somebody described the book to me recently that Bug was Parker from the Westlake novels. He's Parker with a heart, and he's Parker with a heart. And I think that's, I'm not comparing myself to Donald Westlake, but I think that's a pretty cool description, because thank you, but he is this character that I think I grew up around a lot of men who had the pressures of race and poverty. You know, I grew up in the rural South, in the rural part of Virginia. I grew up in very poor. And so I saw a lot of hardworking men, my uncles. You know, me and my father had a strained relationship. And so despite the strain or the fact that me and my father were estranged, I did know that he didn't want me to go through the things he went through. My uncles the same way. You know, my mom has a lot of brothers, and so I have a lot of uncles. And so I saw them struggling to be the best version of themselves when the whole world was trying to keep them down. And so there were times where I would feel that stress, I would feel that anger, and I wanted to act out. And they would say a version of what Bug says to Javon. It's like, you ain't got to worry about that right now. Enjoy being a kid. And sometimes when you're a person of color, it's hard, you don't get that luxury of just being a kid. You don't get that luxury of just going to the basketball court. You get pulled over by cops. You get stopped. You get looked at in a strange way by strangers that feel like they have the authority to say something to you. And so I wanted to articulate that moment between Bug and Javon, where Bug, he's trying everything he can so that his son doesn't have to go through what he's gone through. And he really, his only desire is for his son to have the freedom to grow up, to just be a kid. Don't have to be an adult, you know, early like Bug did. And so that relationship is very important to me. It was very important to me as a writer. I wanted to portray a strong, not just a strong marriage between an African-American man and an African-American woman, but a strong father-son dynamic, because I think the father and son dynamic at large is complex and hard to define for a lot of people. And specifically, there's a myth, I think, of the missing Black father. And I wanted to show multiple sides to that. Yes, Bug's father has gone, but he's there for his kids. Even if he makes mistakes, even if he's done, like I said, horrible things from a place of love, he desperately doesn't want to abandon his children. He desperately doesn't want them to go through that fate that he went through. And so those tender moments also help to separate Bug from Beauregard, because Bug is an outlaw wheelman who can, you know, who will put a gun in your mouth. Beauregard is a father who, you know, plays with his youngest son and makes him giggle, you know. And so I wanted to show those multitudes.
Yeah, and I think you did it with these sort of iconic scenes of that where they're having these conversations. That one in the car just slayed me. I mean, I was a mess for a while, but then there's these moments where he comes home and he's picking up Stink and he throws him over his shoulder, and you capture so many of those little details and actions that every parent has done, and every parent does that, and when they do it, you know, all that other baggage that they're carrying on the other shoulder, they just have to put it down for a while, right? And so I think that relationship is great. Let's talk about Kia for a bit. Another car.
I did it on purpose too.
I hoped you did. Thank you. Just so I can say to my students, see, writers do stuff like that.
I think Kia is the voice of reason in the book. Like I said, if Bug listens to Kia, the book is only 7 pages long.
Right, and who wants to read that, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so I wanted to show this, you know, Joseph Campbell talks about the hero's journey, and I like to think of it as the protagonist's journey, and that classical Roman idea of fatal flaw. And so Bug's fatal flaw is his hubris. And so Kia is sort of his Greek chorus, that she keeps reminding him, you have another way out of this. You have an alternative out of this, but he can't see it because he's lived his life a certain way. You know, your greatest strength is your greatest weakness. Bug's greatest strength is his confidence in himself. He knows he's the smartest guy in the room, but that also leads to being his greatest weakness because he cannot take advice from the woman who loves him maybe more than anybody else in the world. And she loves him. Make no mistake about that. Kia loves him. And so because he refuses, not because he dismisses her, he respects her, but he just is so confident in himself. He keeps telling himself, I can figure it out. At one point, he actually tells her, she says, how are you going to get out of this? What are you going to do? Why do you keep saying it? He said, I'm going to get out of it because I always do. And so that's his fatal flaw. And she acts as this Greek chorus, trying to anchor him, trying to hold him down in a way that makes him not have to resort to the demons of his lesser nature. And so I wanted her, and I hope that she comes across as strong and forthright in her own way, but not in a harpyish or harpish type way. She loves this man. She cares about her sons. She cares about him. And, she's, as she said in the book, she's loved him since she was 17. At the same time, she doesn't give him easy answers. She doesn't let him off the hook. She holds him accountable. And I think the best relationships, in my opinion, are where both partners hold each other accountable.
Yeah. I agree with it. I think that's a great way to describe her, because I never saw her, even though she's obviously a secondary character, I never saw her as secondary. I think she plays a real pivotal role in giving us access on a regular basis to that more tender part of Bo, because Bug, when he does gets into the heist part of it, he loves that fast car. Your description of the adrenaline, that car scene right after they do it. Oh my God, I wanted to get right out into the driveway. It's like, I'm doing this. And let me just say to people, go ahead.
I was going to say, I think Bug is sort of an addict to the adrenaline.
Yeah.
He's addicted to it. And like a lot of addicts, he's not honest with himself about it. He loves the feeling of the heist. He loves the speed, like you said, the adrenaline, the ability to show off his skills. And so, he definitely is a different person when he's behind the wheel.
Well, and I just have to say about that initial action scene, I really would like to know if you practiced it at all in a car. Are you a good driver?
I will tell you, I know how to drive, and being a good driver, I think, are two different things. I have a lot of speeding tickets. When I was a kid, my cousins were shade tree mechanics. So they had my cousin had a Ford Maverick, and I would sneak out, sometimes, to my mother's chagrin, and I would ride out with him, and we would go to where the guys were having drag races, and I would ride with him. And when I got old enough to have my own car, I had the Cutlass that's in the first scene, the 76 Oldsmobile Cutlass in the first chapter of the book, my high school car. And so it was all souped up. We took out the original motor and put like a 405 in it, and put like aluminum drive shafts in it, and it had a supercharger, and so there's a lot of stuff I did to it. That car got me in so much trouble. Oh my God, I got 2 speeding tickets the same day. My mom made me sell it. So
that just makes me. I love all this stuff, but about the most I can do with my car is fill it with gas. But I would love to be able to do all these things. I don't have a lot of things on my bucket list, Sean, but do one adrift and a few of those things. For those of you who haven't read the book yet, when you're going to know the scene I'm talking about. Obviously, we've already said he's hired to be a driver for a heist, and the scene, what happens after that, you think you know what's coming, but you just took it was so awesome. It was so awesome. Before I ask if anyone else has some questions, I'm going to dominate just a little bit more and ask you a little bit more about setting and place, because this takes place in a small town. He is not an outsider. The thing about Parker, we've talked before about Richard Stark's novels, and almost all of the Parker novels, a bit like Lee Child too, is the hero comes in from the outside, and Parker, he doesn't live in the area where he commits his crimes, but Bug is right here. This is his home, this place. Say a little bit about how you thought about place in relation to him.
I grew up in a small town, and I wanted to present the glory and beauty of a small town and the grotesqueness of it. Because part of the thing that's grotesque about a small town is everybody, and everybody knows you. And there are assumptions, there are things that people think they know about you. There are limitations that are placed on you because everybody knows everything. And so like Blacktop Wasteland is sort of a metaphor for where this takes place. It's a small town called Red Hill, Virginia, which is basically where I grew up at. with another name, with some window dressing. But it's a part of that idea that, you know, this Blacktop Wasteland is like a circular road. Everybody in the book wants to get out. You know, progress has left this part of the world behind. And again, I grew up in a small town like that. You know, there are still abandoned buildings in my town that were, you know, ice plants or installation plants, and places where, you know, the industrial revolution has started to recede. And so I wanted to write a story with a character not just facing internal economic problems just from his own life, but also this sort of external malaise of economic problem. There's a scene where Bug is driving through town and he passes these abandoned buildings, and he talks about how they're, you know, like abandoned monoliths to a lost civilization. And so I wanted to give that sense of a town gone to seed. And so it accomplishes two things, in my opinion. One, it makes you root for Bug, even though he's sort of an anti-hero. He's a man who can be tender with his children, but he's also a man who can slam your hand in a car door until you give him what he wants. And so I wanted to create a sense of camaraderie with Bug. I wanted people to realize that he's struggling not just with his own issues, but with this town as a whole. And two, it creates an atmosphere for the book of desperation, of despair, of people, like you said, living on the margins, right on the edge. And so that helps give the narrative more propulsion, because you get invested in the characters and their situation, and you're also aware of where this is happening at. And so you get a mental image of what's going on in this book, in this town. People know this town. Even if you've never been in a small town, you've driven through a town like this. And if you live in a small town, you definitely know this town.
Yeah, and I also think that I think he mirrors in his character, you know, that setting is a mirror here for him as much as it is the place in which he operates. And then part of the reason he's in the situation he's in is because this chain company, whatever, has come in, you know, white owned, and they can cut deals. And so he's losing business for that. The other thing that you know, we're talking a lot about how the character and plot, and it's a great thriller, but there are also moments where you're a little bit of a philosopher, or not you. I always tell my students, don't assume that the narrator is the author, but right? But
Right.
he's a little bit of a philosopher, and I just wrote down some places where, you know, I know this, but coming from this man that came to life on the pages for me. At one point he says, when you're a Black man in America, you're living with the weight of people's low expectations on your back every day. And he goes on, I think he's talking to one of his sons actually at the time.
Yeah. He's telling it, he's having a conversation with Javon. At that point, Javon has spoken to him about that he knows they're under some financial strain. And at 12 years old, he offers to quit school. Like, I'll come work with you at the garage. And so Bug has this, you know, this version of the talk that a lot of African-American, a lot of people of color have with their children, where you have to, and it's a hard conversation to have, where you have to lay it out. I don't have any kids, but I've definitely had that, my parents had that conversation with me, that there are people who are going to judge you differently because of the color of your skin. And the only thing you can do about that is excel, that you have to do twice as good to just be considered almost, you know, reasonable. And so I think that section is sort of I wouldn't say the crux of the book, but it's a big point. I think Bug was speaking, I think I was speaking through Bug to a certain extent, but I was also speaking to a lot of people who may not be aware of that, people who don't understand it and don't understand that part of the culture of being a person of color in America. And there are other points where Bug talks about his father and the relationship he has with him, and about, you know, there's a term called toxic masculinity, and that is definitely a real thing, and it definitely has negative effects on society as a whole. But there's also, I think, a thing I coined tragic masculinity. And Bug, his masculinity is tragic for him. It injures him just as much as it hurts the people around him. And it's this way that you try to hide your wounds and your pain. And for Bug, part of that tragic masculinity is realizing that, you know, he has his mother in the book. He loves her because she's his mom, but she doesn't give that much back to him because she's so broken. And I think there is an idea that broken people have a hard time not passing that on to other people. I think the book a lot, I try to talk about, the inheritance of pain that we sometimes give to our children and we receive from our previous generations. And doesn't mean pain out of a nefarious sense, but sometimes people are just so broken, they don't have the tools to share love. They don't have the tools to show affection and how that affects you. And so for Bug, he has a missing father and he has a mother who's so hurt and so angry at this missing father that she's not able to embrace him the way a mother should. And so he's sort of an emotional orphan. And he's, again, fighting so hard not to pass the sins of the father and the mother onto the son. And so, yeah, there's a little philosophizing. I mix it with, shootouts and car chases. Because like my mom said, a little bit of honey makes the medicine go down.
Absolutely. And I have to say, though, that there's a few moments with his mom that I just laughed. I mean,
Yeah.
I wanted to kind of smack her, but I also just thought it was real. She's
sassy.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, for sure. Yeah. There's definitely that. But as you were talking there and describing all of that, and I hadn't really thought about this till this moment, and you may very well be aware of Ernest Gaines and
Yes.
A lesson before dying.
One of my favorite books. Yes.
Oh my gosh, mine too. I teach it in one of my classes at Alverno, and the thing that the students take away from it, there's two Black male characters, and one of them, for a crime he didn't commit, is going to the electric chair. It takes place during Jim Crow. And the other character is a teacher who's struggling. That's what made me think of it. All that stuff you just described about Bo and being a Black man in the 21st century, it's Grant in A Lesson Before Dying.
Yeah, I love that book. Lesson Before Dying is such an incredible treatise on the idea of Black masculinity in the 20th century and Black masculinity in the shadow of Jim Crow. What does it mean to be a man when society tells you you're not even human? And so,
a hog, we talk about in the book.
Yeah, you're a hog. Yeah, you decide I'm a hog because you've been conditioned to feel that. And so with Bug, there's this idea that, again, like I said, he knows, Bug he's incredibly skilled as a driver, but he's very smart. He has an eidetic memory. He's incredibly good with mathematics. And he knows, given other circumstances, given another path in life, he could be an engineer, he could be a professor, but that wasn't the lot that he was given. He has a line in the book where he says, he talks about a counselor he had when he was a kid, and he says, for boys like him, they didn't have the luxury of options, and so Bug doesn't have those options, and so it definitely talks about Black male identity and masculinity and where they meet in men like Bug. And I wanted to talk about that because I think there's a paucity of stories about African-American men and African-American people and in the South. There's this idea that some people have that the South is the sole provenance of neo-Confederate apologists. And that really just irks me beyond any reasonable conversation because, my family goes back 6 generations of Virginia. My great-great-great-grandfather was born a slave. And so that history of the South belongs to me as much as it belongs to Nathan Bedford Forrest. My family bled and sweat and worked on that soil. And we had to fight for every scrap of dirt that we've ever had. And so I really wanted to kind of reclaim that and tell a story set in southeastern Virginia, the former home of the Confederacy, and talk about African-American characters in a modern setting, and also talk about how they interact with, the white people that live in that town. Because one of Bug's cohorts in his heist is a poor white man named Ronnie Sessions, who's an ex-con. He's sort of the antithesis to Bug. Bug is smart, cool, and professional, and Ronnie's just got a wild hair up his butt. And so they kind of, he's the antithesis to Bug.
But I love the fact that that moment you just described where he's talking about options and the counselor saying you got this or this, and he's talking to his daughter, right? And at the time, and he's trying to get her to see that he's doing what he's doing, so she has those choices. And also, like most fathers, he's not happy with her boyfriend.
Yeah, there's a funny scene where he meets her boyfriend and he gives him the extra hard handshake. And so I've been the recipient of that handshake before when I was in my misspent youth. And so it's stuck in the back of my mind. But yeah, he has this daughter from a previous relationship when he was a teenager, and he loves her, and there's a lot of complications there, but he's had a difficult relationship with her, and he's, again, trying to give her options, trying to give his son options. There's so many people that depend on him, and so he bears this weight on his shoulders, and part of him collapsing under that weight is him returning to a life of crime. And so I'm fascinated with crime because I think the crime novel is an incredible vehicle to discuss the human condition. I mean, one of the greatest novels ever written is Crime and Punishment by Dostoevsky, because I think crime shows the human animal at its most base, at its most vulnerable. And so, a lot of people will look at someone who commits a crime and like, oh, they're a criminal, they're a thug, they're this or that. And sometimes that may be true, but 99.9% of the time, somebody who commits a crime is desperate. And they're desperate because they maybe care about somebody in their life. They may be getting ready to get kicked out of the house. They may be getting ready to lose their car. They may find that they may be addicted to a drug and they're sick and they don't have any other option. They don't know anything else to do. And so I'm fascinated about talking and using crime as a vehicle to discuss things like that.
Yeah, one of the things that I think, and I've said this many times and I've written about this a lot, is that I think some of the best fiction and the best American novels are being written in the crime genre. And I also think that in many ways it is a genre that at its heart is a moral imagination. I mean, it's about morality. And if you want to talk about values, you got to pick up a crime novel.
Yeah, because I think that the idea of crime novels, I was talking with somebody this on the Twitterverse the other day. The difference between a hard-boiled crime novel and a noir crime novel is the hard-boiled crime novel, there's a certain moral inflexibility that the protagonist uses almost as a superpower. Sam Spade will be in love with a woman, but still send her to prison because it's the right thing to do. And in the noir crime novel, the more inflexibility of society is what is a yoke on the protagonist's back. And so it is a way to talk about, values and morality and the id versus the super ego. You can talk about all that within a crime novel. I mean, Chester Himes was doing this 50, 60 years ago, and so it's definitely a vehicle, I think, that can be used to extrapolate a lot about the human condition. I'm not saying I'm doing that, but there are people who have done it. So,
well, I'm going to say it. I think you are doing it. And I also think you've got lots of great threads of Greek and classic literature going through it. You must be a fan of some of that too, because when you were describing before, I was thinking about Sisyphus, right? Going up the hill with the rock on his back and he's getting rolled back down. I mean, that's pretty much
the myth of Sisyphus. Yeah. I was a huge fan of Greek mythology growing up. My mom used to read a lot of Greek mythology, and she would pass that on to me. I grew up in a house, like I said, we were very poor, but everybody around me loved to read. And so I'd read, my grandma had these Harlequin romances. I'd read those, but then my mom was going to college. And so she would give me like her copies of the Iliad and the Odyssey and the stories of the Greek and Roman gods. And so that has definitely been a part of my genesis as a writer, is looking at those morality plays to a certain extent. But also, like I said, growing up, I used to go to, there was a thrift store in our town, and you used to go in there, and for $1, you could pick 5 paperbacks out of this big basket they had. And so I read everything. I read everything from Dorothy L. Sayers to Theodore Dreiser, American Tragedy, McTeague by Frank Norris, or, I'd read like the old supermarket pulp novels like Mac Boleyn and Long Arm and stuff like that. So I have this huge backlog of a wide variety of fiction that I grew up loving. And so I definitely try to incorporate as much of that into my writing as I can.
And I think if we had longer, the teacher and me would want to peel back all those threads and show readers where you could see evidence of some of that stuff. I have one last question. I'm going to save my question. I'm going to ask if there's any questions from those of you who are joining us. And hey, I just switched to the other view so I can see we've got lots of fine folks out there. So if anyone has a question for Sean, please.
And I'll remind you real quick, you can always drop your questions in the chat function there. Carole, if you don't mind, I'm going to use this chance because I'm running the thing to ask my question first.
You, of course, should do that.
So yeah, Sean, I love this book and I love all the locations in this book. And we've talked a lot about like how scary this place in the book is, how scary that is or whatever. But I don't think you can write the way you do about Virginia, about this land, about the rural area without really having some love for it. So I'm curious, like, what is your favorite place? Like, if you could close your eyes and go to somewhere in the book right now and just be like, where would it be?
I grew up in a small town called Matthews County. And so Matthews County is Red Hill, like I said, with just a different nomenclature. And in Matthews, there's a small beach called Bethel Beach. And when I was a kid, my uncles and we would my uncle would get his truck and we'd jump in the back of that truck and we go down to the dock there and we go crabbing with like chicken necks. We take little chicken necks and put them on the hooks and throw them in the water and pull some crabs up. We go swimming. When the sun would go down, there would be porpoises that were off out in the bay and you could see them jumping. And that's one of my favorite places in the world. It's one of my favorite memories. I can almost smell the salt air, and feel the breeze coming off the ocean. And I love Virginia. I do. I love the South. I'm a son of the South. There's nothing as fun sometimes as a kid being 16-year-old and packing all your friends in a car and going to, and you said you grew up in West Virginia, so you know what I'm talking about, going to a field party where everybody lines their cars up and they turn their high beams on and there's a bonfire and somebody got somebody to go get some whiskey and some cheap liquor. Anybody out there that's ever drank Mad Dog 2020, you know what I'm talking about. So.
Oh, my friend Donna, one of my retired colleagues is here, and everything you just said, she's nodding. I know she's from out east. And she was a bad girl, I'm sure. I thought for sure though. I thought for sure you were gonna say the Tasty Freeze.
Oh man, the Tasty Freeze. Oh my gosh. That's my father used to joke me about that because he said, I think a serial killer could pull up and you would jump in the car if they was going to the Tasty Freeze. There is nothing in the world as good and wholesome, as delicious as a cold chocolate milkshake from a rural Southern Virginia Tasty Freeze. They're not paying attention to any health codes or any, but man, those chocolates milkshake, it takes you an hour to drink the damn thing. But man, there's some of my best memories as a kid is waiting for that damn milkshake to melt. So
and you got that, you worked that into the book, and it's a wonderfully poignant scene in the book too.
Yeah. But like he was saying, I love Virginia. I love the town I grew up in. All my books are a love letter to where I grew up at, because even though we grew up poor and we had hard times, I never felt like unloved. I grew up around so many, barbecue pit philosophers and family reunion orators and so many great storytellers and gregarious characters. And that even as a kid, I just felt this incredible love of storytelling. And so to be to sit at the knee of my uncles as they tell tales that were probably not true, but they were too fun to, if they're not true, who cares, because we're having so much fun. I definitely try to incorporate that into my writing. For all the pain and misery and violence that happens in my books, there still is a love of the place that I call home. And so I definitely, I'm glad that I hope that people get that.
I think they do. I think they will, because there's a real humanity in this book in all the characters, even Kelvin. We haven't really talked about.
I love Kelvin. I love Kelvin. Even Ronnie, he was a double crossing, two-faced, and backstabbing son of a bitch. I still got an affection for Ronnie. He's those Elvis tattoos. Right. They're all part of a family I've created in my mind. So.
Well, and
definitely,
you and the reader comes into that family very quickly. Any other questions? Anybody else out there have a question?
Don't be shy.
Don't be shy. Even if you haven't read the book, if you've anything that we've talked about that has intrigued you. Nope,
they can ask me how many bar fights I've been in.
Okay. Since you bring it up, How many? How many?
I have been. Well, I grew up behind a bar in Matthews, and so as a kid, we would sneak out. I did a lot of sneaking out as a kid. I wasn't a bad kid. I just had bad ideas, and so growing up, we definitely grew up. Again, I grew up around hardworking guys that were rough and tumble. That would go to the bar on Saturday night and then get up and go to church and hallelujah Sunday morning. And so I was raised in this environment, not of violence, but of just a physical toughness that can hold you back a little bit, but also can help you a little bit. And so I definitely matured past that. But yeah, I've had my share of scrapes. I've won more than I lost, but the ones I lost were epic. So
well, but you're not supposed to tell us about those, because at one point in the book, I don't remember the character's name, but it's the one who owns the Precision and the Precision Auto Store, and you say to his wife, well, he isn't going to talk about that one because he lost, and big white dudes like him only want to talk about the ones that they win, right? So here's my last question for you, Sean, and maybe on social media you can post it and we can share. There's a ton of music in this book. He likes to listen to some really good, cool tunes when he's driving, as you would imagine. Like Buddy Guy, I use Al Green, we've got Stevie Ray Vaughan is playing in a really critical moment. And so I'm wondering if you could give us a playlist that when you're driving fast, what's your playlist?
There's a playlist for Blacktop Wasteland on Spotify. I will share it on social media. But music is very important. I'm talking fast because I think my signal is weak, but music is very important to me as far as a writer and as far as creating scenes. So I love blues and hip hop and classical and classic rock and southern rock. And so I mix all that together when I'm writing.
Excellent. So if you could post that and I'll share it too, that'd be great. And then Christine wanted to know what you're working on now. Are you working on your next book, and is it the same characters?
No, it's different characters. It's a standalone. Bug may return. We're still talking about that, but my next book is called Razorblade Tears, and I'll give you the elevator pitch really fast. It's about two fathers, one black, one white, both ex-cons, who are investigating the murders of their sons. Their sons were gay and were married, and they're murdered in what appears to be a hate crime. And so these fathers decide to investigate because as their sons were growing up, neither one of them were very accepting of their son's sexuality. And so to redeem themselves, they decide to get revenge for their deaths. And so in doing so, hopefully they'll transition and be better people by the end of the book.
Oh my gosh. Well, you've sold it to all of us, right? We're going to be first in line for sure. Sean, it has been such a pleasure. And thank you for coming and joining us. And thank Boswell and all of you folks who took time out on Tuesday. It is Tuesday, right? I'm losing track of days.
Yeah. On
Tuesday night to join us. And once again, Sean, cheers and very happy birthday.
Thank you so much. Thank you guys for having me. Thank you for everybody that showed up. Thank you. I'm sorry my signal is weak, but I was so glad to be here. I'm so happy to be a part of this. And again, thank you guys so much. Thank you, everybody that's bought Blacktop Wasteland. And if you haven't bought it, what are you waiting for?
Right?
No, I'm kidding.
No,
Thank
get
you
in
again.
your car, get in your car and drive really fast somewhere and get the book. Go to Boswell.
Put the windows down, turn on some Allman Brothers, and just hit that 2-lane highway and drive it like you stole it.
That's it. Thank you so much, Sean.
Thank you so much. Thank you guys.
Bye.
Thank you so much, Sean. Thank you so much, Carole. This has been wonderful. We do have at Boswell Blacktop Wasteland 20% off. There's a link in the description. If you didn't hit it, you can always go to boswellbooks.com and find it there. Thank you all so much. We would not have a bookstore, virtual or otherwise, without you. Good night, everyone.
Good night. Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Daniel. Bye, everyone.